Chapter 8. Without his biological father hanging around or checking in, causing a general disruption to his day-to-day routine, Titus's life went back to what he considered his normal equilibrium. He got up, grabbed breakfast with his mom and dad, grabbed a couple of cups of coffee, then headed off for his classes. At noon on Thursdays and Fridays, he had no class for an hour, so he called Misha and roped her into coming to the campus to pick him up and take him to lunch so that they could hang out and just chit-chat, or he could drive there and meet her. Truth be told, of course, he didn't have to do much in the way of arm-pulling to get her to spend time with him. It was on the third of these Thursdays that Misha brought up the question of Ashkar's abrupt departure. "I'm sorry, T, but I have to ask," she started, pausing to sip at her Coke and nervously look for their waitress, searching for any excuse to tuck away once more the words that were en route to passing through her lips. She had been enjoying these get-togethers, especially since Titus's devotion to his studies seemed to have cranked up to 11 since Ashkar Sutek once again exited stage left. Has Ashkar texted you yet, or emailed? "Yeah, yesterday," he replied with a nod, which nonplussed her. She would have assumed that contact from Ashkar would be the first thing out of his mouth when she flagged him down in their usual booth, and Katie brought him a menu. Instead, he had launched into asking Misha if she'd gotten any Halloween party invites. She had, in point of fact, received a couple, and she tried to hint that if Titus wanted to come as her +1 to any of them, she'd be more inclined to go. To her chagrin, Titus hadn't yet picked up on the hint. Still, now there was this to contend with. "Really? What did he say?" "Not much. Just that he had wrapped up his contemplations and performed all the necessary rituals for his little pilgrimage, and that he was enjoying being back on the East Coast again. Said he'd be sticking around out that way for a few more extra days of R&R, and that he'd be back by next Saturday, which that's fine by me. I told him that I probably wouldn't be able to have any kind of powwow with him before then anyway. Between whatever Halloween party you and I end up going to on Friday, and then game day on Saturday, I'm not really going to want to tack another outing onto next weekend, you know?" "Oh." Misha tried not to blush, moving her bangs out of her face, looking down at the table. You didn't say one way or the other if you'd want to go to one of those parties." "I sort of figured it was a given, Mish," he said, sitting up straighter so that Katie could set his plate down in front of him. Misha's came down next, and Katie snagged her glass for a refill. "You got a theme picked out for us already?" he asked, picking up his oversized chicken sandwich. "Indeed I do," she answered, pulling out her phone and navigating to a recently saved screen grab. "Huh. Kenpachi and Yachiru," he said with a grin. "Not a bad combo, though you're not quite that tiny." "No, but I could ride around on your shoulder or back like she does with Kenpachi pretty easily." "Yeah, the horns make for pretty good safety handles, just in case," he said with a slight shake of his head. "Did you already order the costumes?" "Just the basics. My dad or I can cover detail stuff on the day of. Being an illusionist has its advantages for certain occasions, if you'll recall. Last couple times we did Halloween together." The pair ate in companionable quiet for a few minutes before Misha broached the next subject she wanted to talk to him about. "So I was thinking about getting my own place finally. Maybe getting Becky to make the leap and go in halves with me."
"Becky Kincaid?"
"No, Powell. Why would I agree to get an apartment with Becky Kincaid? That girl rotates more dick into her daily life than a urologist."
"Tell me how you really feel about her, Mish,"
he said with a snicker. "Look, Becky K's got plenty to like, okay? I'm not trying to judge."
"Oh, judge away, hon."
"I'm just saying I'd rather not live with someone who's going to have a different random dude making booty calls every other night." Frankly, I don't know how her sister puts up with it. Titus kept his own counsel on that score, as he knew that Tabitha Kincaid had little room to call shenanigans on anyone's behavior, since she had developed a fairly serious cocaine habit. This wasn't broadly known, but Henry had mentioned it to Titus the last time that he'd swung by for a visit and a chat just the week before. The guy was a borderline career criminal, it seemed, but the young Minotaur had grown up with him, and Titus had a hard time letting go of personal connections, even when they didn't seem the healthiest for him to maintain. When they were back outside, leaning back against the front of Titus's truck after their lunch, Misha smoking a cigarette and enjoying the chill breeze, Titus took a moment to appreciate the swirl and skirl of dead leaves drifting their way through the parking lot. Lucky little things in their way, he thought. No worries, not a care in the world, just drifting along where the wind might push them. "So, where's the apartment that you're looking at?" Titus inquired. "Over in Eden." "No, that's not too far out. About, 15 minutes? The way you drive? More like 25. She gave him a playful flick on the arm through his hooded sweatshirt. "But it's not a done deal. Like I said, I have to talk it through with Becky P yet. I don't think I could afford the place on my own, and it's a 2-bedroom. So it'd be kind of a waste to rent it even if I could, you know?" "Yeah, I get that. Nothing in a 1-bedroom or a studio, though?" "There's a couple around here, but they're just asking way too much. I make decent money on my streaming setup, but that's on average. There's some lean months here and there. That's the main reason I haven't already set out on my own." "Well, that," she said, letting out a wistful sigh. "And my dad's probably going to have a meltdown when I decide to move out. He's mentioned a few times that most elves don't leave their parents' homes back in Chaldea until they're almost 50. "Sure, but they also live to be around, 1,000 years old in the old country, don't they?" "Yeah, so that frame of reference isn't really solid. Add to the fact that I'm only, half-blood, which always seems to fly right over his head." She checked her watch briefly, then ran a hand lightly down his arm, sliding away slowly toward her own vehicle. "You gotta get going to class, big guy. I'll talk to you later." Titus gave her a nod, climbed into his truck, and waited until she had pulled away, exchanging a brief honk back and forth in farewell. As he started the vehicle, he had a nagging suspicion that he had missed something that he was possibly too close to in order to properly grasp. Rumbling to himself that this was going to nag him all day, Titus Jacobson headed back to campus. Titus thought back to the frustration that he had felt just the prior Saturday afternoon when he watched Richards' last-ditch hope throw get picked off by an absolute lightning bolt of a cornerback and get returned just far and long enough to run out the clock. That had been a hellish test of his ability to keep his temper in check, because he had seen the guy from his spot on the sidelines just lining up to pull a QB spy on the screen pass. If that toss had been caught for even 6 or 7 yards, Hammond could have at least tried to boot a 50-yarder and win them the game by 2 points. Instead, the throw had been snapped out of the air clean by the defender, and Buff State had dropped its first loss of the season. Now, he stood on the sidelines and smiled from horn to horn, looking over at the scoreboard. There was literally no feasible way for Simmons Tech's team to make a comeback. Down by 17 points and with the ball in Buff State's hands, and only a minute left on the game clock, there simply did not exist a scenario in which Titus's squad could lose the game. It always felt good to win, but it felt even sweeter when doing so on the road after a tight loss the week before. He joined in the hooting and hollering when all was said and done, soaking in the thrill of victory. As he walked back toward the Simmons Tech Athletic Center's locker room access for the school's visiting teams, Coach Reynolds came up alongside and clapped him on the back, snickering and still beaming from the rout. 5-1 at the halfway mark ain't all bad that, son, he said. Hey, come here. As the rest of the team made straight for the showers, Reynolds stood with his hands on his hips next to Titus at the borrowed locker. Listen, we had a scout out there today, Titus. He was here to watch you boys on the D-line. Titus was in the midst of taking his pads off, slowing his movements as he considered what the defensive coach was insinuating, or might be insinuating. Okay, Titus said slowly, setting his pads down on the bench behind himself and grabbing his shower towel out of his duffel bag from the bottom of the locker. He wrapped it around his midsection and got out of his lower gear, carefully slipping his travel hoof pad caps onto his hooves. Did the guy talk to anybody? Not directly, no, Reynolds said evenly. But Titus, you had 6.5 sacks credited today. You had 7 stops for negative yardage on rush attempts. You were in their backfield all day, son. All day long. And after that 5th sack, when you held your fists up, yeah, I took a peek at that guy, and he was holding his phone up toward you with the camera on it, I think. Titus, I think someone's already got a bead on you to declare. Listen, I'm glad you invited me out to hang and have a few, but this isn't exactly what I had in mind, man, Henry Gull groused, as he sat in the chair that Misha usually took up on the Jacobson front porch that evening, the sun already gone from the skies over western New York State. Besides, we ain't exactly been the best of buds for a couple of years now, except for hanging out here and there, Titus. The biker shifted in his seat, his leather jacket creaking with each motion as he swigged back a drag of his beer. Did you get yourself into some shit you need my particular kind of help getting out of, my man? No, nothing like that, Henry. Titus took a pull of his own beer and let out a sigh. He had a small knot in his guts. He hadn't even told his parents what Coach Reynolds had conveyed to him after the game in the locker room. He tried to rationalize this decision to withhold, telling himself that he just didn't want to wind up their hopes that a pro-level team was already sniffing around to see if they could bring him on board for a career in the National Football League. After all, what parent of an athletic child didn't entertain, even momentarily, some dream of one day being able to point at the television or computer screen and say of one of the players, "That's my kid"? But Titus knew full well that this rationale wasn't at the core of his conundrum. So, what's the trouble, Ballman? Titus briefly related to Henry the conversation that Coach Reynolds had had with him after the game just a few hours earlier, to which his childhood friend let out a low whistle. Damn, dude. Cheers to you if it really was a scout looking to snap you up down the road. Henry tilted the neck of his beer bottle toward him, and Titus clinked with him half-heartedly. Are your folks stoked? Your bio dad? I haven't told anyone else, Titus croaked. To be honest with you, Henry, and try not to take any offense with this, but you would normally not be the person that I'd tell this kind of thing about first. Henry sipped at his beer, a wry grin crossing his stubbled cheeks. Nah, man, no offense taken. I get it. I'm not really part of your day-to-day world anymore, Titus. It's cool, Bull Man. We're friends, just not as tight as we used to be. I appreciate that. There's another reason, though, one that kind of poked me just before I decided to actually call you over. Henry rolled his empty hand forward in a out-with-it gesture. You were never a dumb guy, Henry. You had options when we were getting near the end of high school. You had your band. Hey, still got it. We just don't do that many gigs these days, Henry interrupted with a pointed finger. We still get together to practice twice a month, though. Really? Well, it's good to hear. Hey, you guys want to do a Halloween party next Friday? Mish already got in touch, man. Lynn's making all the arrangements. Titus made a fist, bumping knuckles with him. But go on. What I'm getting at here is, you had a couple of clear directions you could have gone with your life after high school, including the one that you decided on. I don't know all the details, and I don't want or need to. I can tell that you're getting by just fine. What I've always wanted to ask you since then is, how did you figure out which path to go down? Henry set his beer down on the little end table between the rocking chairs and sauntered down to where his motorcycle stood by the curb, rummaging around in one of his luggage bags. When he returned, he was carrying a small roll-out toolkit, which he set down near Titus's hooves, rolling it open for him to look at. I started tinkering around with engines and shit whenever my old man gave me a chance to help him out down at the shop, Henry said, crouched down by the end of the tool roll. You remember what he said every time you and Mish came over to hang out after school? If you touch anything out in my garage, put it back where you found it or I'll break your head open. The old man had a temper, but he was mostly bark. At least with us. Titus thought back to those days, when life had seemed a lot less complicated. That was half the reason I didn't hang with you guys more in sophomore year on weekends. My dad had me helping him at the shop to actually learn what the hell I was supposed to be doing. So I kind of kept it up, even when he passed. Titus heard the hard swallow, noted the way Henry paused for just a few moments in the quiet. Yeah, it was after that you and the band started playing together more, Titus said. I remember that first song you wrote and played at Jim Cinch's party at the end of junior year, Farewell, Dad. Yeah, Henry said, sniffling just the once. He rolled up the tools and brought them up onto his lap as he returned to the second rocker on the Jacobsons' porch. I sure hope God's got a plan. He just received one great man, the biker said, quoting his own song. I was going to the shop every couple of days after school, trying to finish the last few customers up that my dad had before the end. Mom sold the place when they were all done, but I still kept in touch with his regulars. Drove around to their places for routine touch-up work through junior and senior years. Between that and the band on a lot of weekends, I didn't see much of you and Mish. I kind of feel bad about that looking back. Hey, don't, Titus said, reaching over and clapping him lightly on the shoulder. You're our friend, Henry, not our keeper. Titus drained off the last of his beer, wiped his mouth. And when we were littler, it was always you who got people to back off of us if they started giving us shit for not being Humes. Henry rolled his tools back and forth in his hands. Learned that from the best, too. He looked over to Titus and gave him a quick up and down. As for what I do for a living, big guy, everyone assumes I'm with the Kingsmen, but that ain't quite right. I'm a pretty good mechanic, especially with bikes, but I never went through the whole load of horse shit to get officially certified, man. And everyone who operates a vehicle, well, they need a mechanic from time to time. You get what I'm trying to say? Titus reached down under the end table, grabbed up 2 more beers from the case Henry had brought over on the back of his bike, and offered him one. Huh. You're an outlaw mechanic, Titus said, twisting the top off his drink and clinking necks with Henry once again. And by outlaw, I obviously don't mean illegal. Still, that's pretty awesome, man. Gives you a lot of flexibility. So wait, Titus said, a pensive look warping his expression. Those times that you've gotten pinched with biker gangs. Guilt by association sweeps, bullman, Henry said with a broad smile, exposing the couple of gaps in his teeth. Trust me, my record's clean, though there's cops in several jurisdictions who like to keep an eye on me when I come to town, seeing as they have no idea why I come hanging around. But anyway, back to your question. about how I figured out what path was going to be the one I went down as a grown man. Well, it's like this, Titus. I knew what would have made my dad proud of me. Sure, it ain't glamorous, but it pays my bills well enough. And rooming part-time with Lynn makes it so she doesn't have to bust her ass for the workaday gig. But mostly, I didn't want to waste all those hours my father spent teaching me how to work on machines. I didn't want that time to go to waste. There settled over Titus and Henry then a companionable silence, and the Hume only drank down about half of his second beer before he set it aside and stood up, turning toward Titus. Those were his, weren't they? The young Minotaur asked, aiming the neck of his beer toward the tool roll in Henry's hand. Yeah, they were. Besides these ears and my sister looking a lot like him, they're all I've got left of him. Titus levered himself to his feet, and the two shared a brief, fierce hug, clapping each other on the back. Titus knew better than to put all of his strength into exchange. He didn't want to break the poor guy in half, after all. When they pulled apart, Henry said, "I'll see you and Mish next Friday at that party." "See you then, bud." As Henry's chopper rumbled off down the road, Titus thought about his own dad, an honest plumber whose trade he hadn't learned the first thing about. He wondered, silently, if John Jacobson ever regretted his son's lack of interest in following in his direct footsteps. From How We Fit by Cedric Welker. Excerpt from Chapter 12. Of all of the old-world rivalries that typified daily life back in the realms of Chaldea, the one that seems to have surprised the Earth-born Outworlders the most by its almost seeming to have vanished entirely is the historical racial bad blood between Minotaurs and Lizardmen. It has been suggested by several social sciences think tanks in both the United States and Germany over the last decade that the chief contributing factor to the elimination of these tensions is the removal of the ages-long rivalry the two races had over the resources of the region known as Estalia, a large territory in the south-central lands of Chaldea's main continent, simply known as Chaldea, given that every other known landmass was little more than a decent-sized island. I would posit that this is a reasonable argument. With their peoples cast into a world that is not only completely alien to them, but also one where humans are the dominant civilized species, replete with their own customs, tribes, religions, and separate nation-states, the Minotaurs and my own people had much bigger concerns to factor for than being at one another's collective throats. In 2010, the Outworlder Perceptions Group, a US-based NGO focused on studying Chaldeans of both Chaldean and Earth origin, conducted a survey of 100 Earth-born Chaldeans from each of the races who were brought over during the original Outworld incident. The survey was composed of 50 questions and sought to measure the interracial attitudes of descendants of Chaldean natives. The group's summary findings, predicated on the survey results and several interviews with participants in the back end of the study, tell an interesting story, one that may indicate that while the next generation of Chaldeans are adapting rapidly to their history being curtailed, they aren't completely free of some of the perceptions held by their peoples. For instance, according to the summary, elves have demonstrated a real knack for maneuvering through Earth's socio-political arenas, which is beneficial to them in arguing on their race's behalf among the Humes. However, of all the Chaldean races, theirs is the longest living, and the Chaldean natives among them have clung to their tendency to view themselves as superior in many ways to the other peoples of Chaldea, even humans. This has provided for some tense exchanges, such as one might recall during the 2006 gubernatorial debate in the state of New York between Eliot Spitzer, John Faso, and Antioch Melai, a Chaldean elf who had served as magister of the city of Parlock in the nation of Sendosh. This is effectively a similar position to governor of a state. During that debate, one of the moderators posed a question of the three candidates that had been submitted by a Minotaur constituent, which was mentioned by the moderator. The question was, quote, "Given how much time has passed since the Outworld incidents, is it possible to start attempting to draft legislation in such a manner that it does not segregate out Chaldean natives and descendants, and can simply refer to us as New Yorkers, given that we are now all citizens of this state?" It is a question that has been seen by many political commentators as indicative of a positive movement toward total and final integration of Chaldeans into everyday American society, which would be beneficial, most believe, to tamping down the divisiveness that sometimes rules the day socio-politically. Unfortunately for Melly, the moderators of the debate opted to allow him to answer the question first, and they turned to his lapel microphone without stating that they would be going to him first for a response. As a result, he was caught on a hot mic saying, "Oh, a Minotaur asked that. Who knew they could even read or write something halfway intelligent?" The responding gasp and appalled glares from the moderators and the assembled audience did not escape his notice, and rather than even attempt to backpedal or explain himself, Melly simply gathered up his index cards, tucked them into his suit coat, and left the debate stage. Many expected the small Minotaur communities in cities like Buffalo, Rochester, and Albany to be in a bit of an uproar over the comment, particularly given their history and reputation for being less than even-keeled temperamentally. However, though some comments and angry words were said among their pupils at various work and gathering places over the next week, and despite some rather slapdash poking by the New York Post at the time, such as a headline that read, quote, "Will Minotaurs cause the next race riots?" their peoples largely shrugged their shoulders and asked if they could please just go back to work and paying their bills. Simon & Schuster, 2015 printing.